This is the Saber Coach Kate podcast, where I highlight the great thinkers, athletes, and coaches in the dynamic sport of Olympic fencing.
Guard.
Andrew Fischl didn't start fencing until his junior year of high school, but achieved a lot very quickly. He was ranked 5th in the country in 2013. Before fencing, Andrew had tried many sports: soccer, tennis, baseball, lacrosse, but none of these sports really engaged him the way fencing did. The reason most people know him is because of the videos he creates. Going by the name Cyrus of Chaos, his handle in Super Smash Bros., his YouTube channel currently houses over 2,500 videos of international level competitions. He started recording bouts at his first Div 1 NAC in Columbus in 2017, when he, in his words, was a wide-eyed little fencer who got destroyed in my pool, leaving me the rest of the day to walk around and watch. I remember seeing so many things that made me think, oh, I should be doing it like this, or I want to try the timing of that next time I'm at practice. Then the next day I couldn't remember anything specifically. He took his parents' videocamera to the next tournament and began recording everything he could. He still does that to this day. Andrew's biggest regret is that he can't make it to every international tournament to capture footage. If you know of anyone who would be willing to help Cyrus of Chaos with this issue, please contact him through his YouTube channel, Facebook, Instagram, Google+, or Twitter. Listen now to the interview I did with Cyrus of Chaos, aka Andrew Fischl. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Saber Coach Kate podcast. My guest for today is Andrew Fischl, all the way in Long Island. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, how are you? Hi, how's it going?
Doing great. Thanks so much for chatting with me today.
No problem.
I'd love to know how you became a fencer.
Sure. So when I was little, I tried a lot of sports, soccer, lacrosse, but nothing really struck my interest. Baseball, too. It was kind of like pulling teeth to get me to go to practice, but I was reading a book called The Great Book of Amber when I was right before my junior year of high school, I think. And there's a lot of sword fighting in that book, and it just kind of struck me as something I'd never tried before, so I wanted to do a class. And it's funny because I knew I wanted to do saber right from the start, but the only thing that was available at first was a foil class, because in order to get me to a saber class, my dad would have had to give up a night of his own sports, which is platform tennis. And at the time, that was just like, I had never shown any interest in sports, so like that was ridiculous. We'll try you with the foil class. And that was actually with Bruce Gilman, who I eventually ended up going to Vassar with, as he was the coach there. But I knew I didn't really like foil. It was a little too tedious for me. I wanted to move more quickly and attack people the way that you do in saber. So it was a good fit for me.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like you had a lot of those fantasies that we all have, where you're a pirate on a ship, or you're living out the fights that you read in your books. And saber was able to accomplish that for you.
I think that was kind of the impression I had of it at first, but obviously it's nothing like that. And I really I like the game that you play with the other people, just the one-on-one aspect of like, how much do you know, how much do I know that you know, and that kind of, I really like that kind of game in all aspects of things that I do. So that's what really has kept me going back to it all this time.
Well, how long were you a foil fencer before you switched over to saber?
6 weeks of the 8-week class.
Okay. And it was like 5 weeks too many?
Yeah, something like that. Maybe 6 weeks too many. But it's ironic, actually. I think at this point, foil is my favorite to watch at a very high level, because once you get past the point where people can like start to hit each other when at will, and not just so much of it is about making the other person miss. It becomes much more tactical, and I think it, at a very high level, is much cleaner than high-level saber. And I think that if I had been exposed to it later, I would have been a better foil fencer, because I think the timing and the games are more to my style than saber is. But at this point, it's too late to make it, a switch. So, but I still definitely very much enjoy saber. So I don't want to leave you with the impression that I don't. But
Well,
yeah.
you watch a lot of fencing, and it's interesting to hear your insights about each of the weapons. I understand where you're coming from, because when the World Championships were being live streamed, I was all into the foil as well, because it is exciting at that level. And to
Yes.
see Miles Chamley Watson do what he does, or
Yeah.
Race do what he does, it's a different game than what I remember it being even 5 years ago.
Yeah, the angles are a lot more prominent than they are in saber. There's a situation with infighting that we almost never get into. Those acts in those situations especially, you have to think a lot more about how you're going to hit the person and how the person might defend themselves from you. And again, that's another layer that we just don't have in saber, because for us, there's no question about whether I'm going to hit you. It's just like, can you parry me or get away? It's not. I'll never miss you if I'm in range to hit you, basically.
Right.
So, whereas in foil, it's not like that. So you have to kind of think about how they're going to move, how I'm going to hit you to compensate for that, all those things. So I like that extra layer to it.
Yeah, lots more second intention actions.
For sure.
You fenced at Vassar, like you said, with Bruce Gilman. Tell me what it was like to fence there.
It was a lot of fun. Vassar is definitely a place where your academics come first. But for me, when I first was going into college, I wasn't very highly rated. I don't even think I had junior points at the time. Maybe I was like a B-rated fencer. So when Bruce told me that at Vassar I'd probably be most likely to be able to go to NCAAs, I was very captivated by that, because for the NCAA format, only 2 people per weapon can fence from a school. So I'm sure I would have enjoyed being somewhere like Columbia, but if I had gone there my freshman year, I would never have gotten to fence at the NCAA level, probably even my senior year, because they just have such a deep team. So for me, it was really good to have an environment where I could kind of develop the way I wanted to, and my coach was in New York City at the time, so it was close enough for me to still go there for practice and for lessons. And Bruce was very accommodating, let me, skip practice, realized I wasn't partying or whatever. Instead, I was actually going to a strong practice in the city, so that was definitely to my benefit. And yeah, I knew I wanted to be somewhere close to the city where the strong saber fencing in the country is, so that definitely worked out. I really enjoyed the team atmosphere there a lot. I still am very close with some of the Vassar fencers who are currently on the team. It was a really fun environment, especially since I didn't have that at all in my high school setting. I never fenced on my high school team. I started my junior year of high school, so it was nice to have the team aspect that I had never sort of had before.
Who were some of your teammates at Vassar?
My saber teammates were Alex Snow, John Rothman, Cody Canning, Dennis Durso, Jared Barinholtz. They made a big impact on me the 2 or 3 years I had to share with each of them. So that was definitely a lot of fun. None of them are involved in the sport anymore. So.
And were they fencers later in life like you as well?
I don't know. I think a lot of them started fencing in high school and really enjoyed it. And I know that we had 4 or 5 people from one specific high school. I can't remember the name of it right now, but they said that the team aspect was a huge part of why they continued fencing in college. And they especially made me feel very comfortable on the team. So I was really grateful for that.
That's really interesting that that's what struck you most, because mostly why people like fencing is because it's an individual sport. But you really came to appreciate the team aspect.
Well, I came to appreciate the team support. It still is very much an individual aspect, and even when I played games like soccer, I wanted to make sure I was in a position where I could have a lot of influence on the game, like the goalie or something, because it's hard for me to be in a sport where I don't feel like I have complete control of the outcome. And at least in that case, even if it's not the control of the game isn't complete, at least a lot of it falls on my shoulders. So whether we win or lose, I know that I can like point to myself as a large reason for that. So if I lose, there's definitely things that I know that I can improve on. And if we win, I know that I helped the team do that. But for me, it was really frustrating in a soccer situation, for example. Even if I was playing really well and the team wasn't, we could still lose, and that was very frustrating to me, which is a nice thing about an individual sport like fencing or tennis, which a lot of my family plays.
Now, you said that when you started fencing in college, you weren't very high rated, but since then, you've developed quite a fencing career. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I think I got my first junior points I think my freshman or sophomore year of college at Junior Olympics. I forget. I forget which one, but that was an amazing feeling. It was in the Charlotte Junior Olympics, and then during my time at Vassar, I got as high as 5th in the country for open division. So I was very close to making a senior team 2 or 3 times, but never quite had the points. Mm-hmm. In 2011, I hurt my knee really badly, and that was the first time I had been rated really highly in the country. It was in the 2010-2011 season, and like right at the end. And at that point, I was 7th in the country, and I was really looking forward to trying to make the Olympic team, and that happened, and I couldn't even compete. I remember having to withdraw from the first World Cup that season and being really disappointed. You just play the cards that you're dealt, and you try to have a positive attitude because, you either take it in stride or you let it affect you, and I'm not the kind of person to let that happen, so.
Wow, it's really great that you were able to overcome that disappointment like that, because like you said, for some people that could really destroy their career, but you didn't let it.
In certain ways, it was still, I had to change my fencing a lot because for a while I couldn't lunge at all, even after the injury had recovered mostly, because when you tear a tendon in your patella like I did, it never fully stops affecting you. So for a long time I couldn't lunge at all, and it was a huge adjustment that I had to make in order to remain competitive. And in doing that, I developed a lot of bad habits which are prevalent today, even though I'm not as hindered by that problem as I was before. But like you said, you have to just make the decision to keep going. So you have to. I chose to do it with a smile on my face.
What were some of those adaptations you had to make?
So a lot of it was in saber. You can't land your foot first when you lunge, but or rather, the landing of the foot constitutes the end of an attack. But when you can't really lunge like that, you kind of have to get creative with the way you do that. So I came up with a way to kind of like do an advanced lunge while landing my foot first that doesn't make it seem like I'm lunging at all. So for my body, it was kind of like a splitting motion, but it was a soft splitting motion, not the percussive action of actually making a lunge. So it's a little bit slower, and it is a bad habit, but it's hard to get out of it after you compensate for years from an injury.
I'm sure.
So, yeah.
Well, and you're so tall, I'm sure that your lunge was a very powerful weapon in your arsenal.
It definitely was.
Yeah.
It was hard at first to go without the range that I had at first, but I think if you talk to my teammates now, they'll tell you that I'm still quite long, even though it's not the fast way that I used to be. But
what do you consider your greatest fencing accomplishment?
My greatest fencing accomplishment, I was able to get to 5th in the country, which I'm pretty proud of, especially during the time that I was pretty much unable to lunge at all.
Wow.
So that to me was a huge accomplishment, especially considering the just like the physical difficulties and the mental difficulties that come with it. So that was really nice. That year, I was on the Pan American Championship, or the zonal team that won gold. So I was really happy about that. I made it to NCAA's from Vassar 4 times, which I don't think anyone in the past had ever gone more than once for fencing. So I was really happy about that as well. Mm-hmm. I think those are my proudest, accomplishments. I also won the Career Athlete Award for my 4 years at Vassar for all of the sports there. So I was also extremely happy about that.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, I was really, really happy about that.
Talk about who you enjoy fencing the most, either American or another nationality, and why you really like to fence them.
So as far as internationally, I really, really enjoy fencing the Koreans, the Hungarians, and the Russians. I match up extremely well with all of them for different reasons. So whenever I have to fence one of them, I always have a lot of fun with it. In team events with Hungary, I have an incredible positive number against them. So it's always fun for me when I have to fence the Hungarian team, because I don't know what it is about the style or the timing, but I find it really easy to figure out what I want to do and implement it. Mm-hmm. So I think that is incredibly fun.
And any Americans that you like to fence?
I really enjoy fencing Daryl Homer because he has a very strong attack that has helped me get my defense to a really high level. And the only way to improve past the point that you are is to find people that can challenge your abilities. And my strongest area of my fencing has always been my defense, and having him attack me a lot has really helped improve it. So that's always a lot of fun.
Yeah, especially if he comes at you with that famous flunge of his.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about your fencing, but really the reason I wanted to do this interview was because of your other persona. You are known as Cyrus of Chaos online. And
it's true.
Why did you choose that particular name for your online presence?
So part of it goes back to the book that I was reading, Amber. It's a big, the whole book is about, I don't want to spoil anything, but the book is about the struggle between order and chaos in the multiverse in this book, and I really liked that aspect of it, so it is associated with that, and I've always enjoyed the name Cyrus. So,
okay.
But it was kind of silly. If I had known that it was going to be as widespread as it was, I probably would have picked something that either was, a little more relevant to what I was doing, or something that at least made a little more sense. But at this point, I definitely identify with it, so that's good.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's different enough that people are able to remember it, and that's really what you need. You need that.
Yeah, for sure. It's a brand.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so we're going to talk about Cyrus of Chaos for just a little bit.
Go for it.
Cyrus of Chaos has created a lot of fencing videos. What inspired Cyrus to get into shooting video of so many competitions and editing them?
So, if you just mean what inspired me to start recording the videos and uploading them, I went to my first Division I tournament in 2007, and it was a Div 1/Junior NAC, and I remember Harry Mahaffey won the junior event, and Keith Smart won the senior event, and I was watching them both on both days, or I was watching them both on each of the days that they won, and I was incredibly impressed at the different actions that they were using and how close they were getting and all the timings that they were trying out, and I was like, I have so many things to try. And then I came back to practice a few days later, and I couldn't remember any specifics.
Right.
And as someone who's a very visual learner, especially in fencing, it's hard to write down the timings and actions that you want to try. So I almost realized that it was pointless to stay at these competitions if I couldn't record. And I started looking around online for fencing resources, and there was almost nothing available. And at the time, I think YouTube was pretty young. I think YouTube kind of was, I first heard about it my junior or senior year of high school. So there wasn't a whole lot of a fencing presence on there. And so I just started recording all the videos of things that I went to. And my dad pointed out that maybe instead of just getting, 10 views per video on my own computer, I could start putting them on YouTube and maybe someone else would like to see them. And I remember the first video I ever uploaded was the finals of one of the first Liberty Cups at MFC. And the first day it got like 100 views, which is a lot for a video, like a finals of a local competition with nobody subscribed to my channel and no presence at all.
Right.
So like maybe there's something to this, and I started uploading everything. And when there's not a whole lot of options, and the person who's filming is filming in a way that they want to capture the fencing, as opposed to some random sports guy who is just filming to make it look good and doesn't really know what they're looking for or what they're trying to capture, I think it really resonates with people more than that. So I think the channel from that perspective was very successful because it's a fencer who is looking for specific things, filming fencers who are doing those specific things. I always had an eye out for interesting bouts. I never liked the ones that were like really gritty or where people complained a lot, so I tried to stay away from those. So I think the choice of what I was filming helped a lot too. Mm-hmm. And as for the compilation videos, I was watching Nicholas Lopez at the Olympics in 2008, and he was one of my first fencing idols. I really loved his counterattack and the way he used each counterattack to set up other counterattacks. I had never seen anything like that before. And so I remember taking every one of his counterattacks from all of his bouts at the Olympics and putting them right next to each other to see. And then I just started writing down my observations. And I was like, well, I have all these other videos that people are watching. Maybe someone will get something out of my observations as well. And I started uploading those too. And that one also got, I think, 500 or 600 views the first day. Mm-hmm. So I was that was something I wanted to keep doing at that point. So that's how that started.
That's a lot of success. Just because YouTube was so new at the time, but also for fencing. There aren't that many of us out there watching these videos, and to have 500 hits that's a big deal.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is also that it was very new for fencers at the time too, just the fact that people were doing this stuff. So if you look at the early videos, there are definitely a lot more views on them than there would be if I put out a video these days. Even from, like, for example, there was a tournament in Budapest in 2010 or something where I had 2 video cameras and I was recording 2 bouts at a time, and each of those 64 bouts has hundreds, if not 1,000 views. And these days, something in the 64 might get like 20 or 30 views, depending on who's fencing. And I think just because it wasn't being done at the time, so it was so new and everyone was really excited about it, that's possibly it as well.
Well, and also, our sport finally has superstars, and so people want to watch those people.
It's true.
And our sport is really evolving into, I'm not going to call it a mainstream sport, but it certainly is getting some of those aspects to it.
Yeah, more recognition is good. I've seen Race does modeling, and I've actually seen him sometimes in stores that I'm shopping in, it's a nice surprise to see a fencer on a billboard, because, any exposure for our sport is good exposure. Mm-hmm. And I remember after the Olympics in 2016, Miles Chamley-Watson made friends with Jack Sock, and he was being mentioned, and tennis has a much larger following than fencing does, so to have a tennis player talking about fencing, that's exciting as well. Mm-hmm. So, and Tim Gunn has been very into it and vocal about it, so someone who's, famous from a modeling perspective, that's also very exciting. Mm-hmm. So all these things are great for the exposure of our sport.
Mm-hmm. What has been your favorite video so far?
I really liked the Montano video that I made. It was the second compilation video that I ever did on his attack, and it's funny because it taught me a valuable lesson that I have to be careful with my terminology, because at the time I didn't think that I had much of an impact on the sport, but after I released that video, I saw the words trample attack popping up all over fencing.net and Facebook, and I remember one of the top fencers was telling me, you have to be careful because people are asking me about, like, how do I work on my trample attack, and that wasn't the intent I had when I made the video. I just wanted to kind of categorize it as something and make it a catchy title, but, you know, that is something I always have in mind when I'm making another video, is just be careful of that sort of thing happening. So
Well,
I really enjoy Montano's attack, and it was really fun making that video. So
Well, it's interesting that you've developed a new word in our fencing lexicon, because, like, my husband has a lesson to teach you how to deal with the trample attack, and he calls it
Yeah.
the anti-trample attack lesson.
right, there you go.
Or, like,
Whoops.
I'll use it on somebody, and they're like, stop trampling me.
Yeah, right, exactly.
That's pretty cool. I didn't know that you were the one that came up with that.
Yeah, accidentally.
Where has it been most enjoyable to shoot video?
Most enjoyable? I don't really know that I can answer that question. I like filming at the World Cups more than I like filming at the NACs, because it's so organized. Everything is on a schedule from the day before, and because you have your pools one day and then your DEs the other day, and the DEs are at a certain place at a certain time, very much unlike the way it is at our NACs.
Yeah.
I actually can and have taken a tableau and gone back and talked to some of my teammates about which bouts I'm going to film the next day. Like, between these 4 bouts, what do you think is most interesting? And people will be like, that bout seems boring. This bout could be good. That bout will be excellent. So will this one. So then we like have a debate about whether I'm going to film red strip or green strip. And then, you know, I go through the list for all of them, do a few 32 bouts that could potentially happen. And then after that, because the numbers start to get a lot lower, for example, there's only 2 round of 16 bouts. Well, there's 8 16 bouts before at a time, so there's 2 of them, so it's a lot easier to watch and decide at that point.
Right.
Because the other way, I have to, like, when a bout ends, I decide, all right, the next bout's on yellow, so I go over there and get a good spot, and, you know, I kind of have the whole thing down to a science.
I was wondering how you selected which bouts, because I saw you at the World Cup in New York City, and it was just you. And I thought, well, maybe you had a whole team of people with cameras, but now I understand.
Most of the time, it's just me. Sometimes I'll have another camera, and I'll ask one of my buddies to do it. Sometimes, if there are multiple good bouts on, especially this starts to happen more often when I get into the 16, I have a camera, and, I mean, in addition to my camera, I have a phone and an iPod, so I'll just, you know, here, take this, please go film that bout between Goo and Ocutsi. I'm going to go film this bout between Daryl and Montano. Mm-hmm. And it's hard for someone to say no to that, because, you know, everyone wants to watch one of those bouts, and it's not much effort to just hold the camera there.
Well, that triggered a memory with me, because the first time that I met you was when I went to a camp in Boston, and we were doing something at the lunch break, and you handed me your phone, and you asked me to record something. We were doing some sort of game or...
Chinese yo-yo, right?
What's that?
Chinese yo-yo, the Diablo?
Yes, exactly.
I still have that footage on my computer.
That's amazing.
That was fun.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And that was a great camp. That was our first out-of-state camp that we ever went to. And
That was a great camp.
yeah, and I have very fond memories of it, in part because of the fun times that we had at those lunches.
Yeah, Ariana runs a good camp.
Yeah, she does. Is there a tournament that you wanted to get footage at, but you couldn't for whatever reason?
I mean, yeah, that's happened many times. I've been injured a lot more recently than when I was younger, and obviously that's just a symptom of, you know, practicing a lot and competing at a high level and getting a little bit older. My body can't handle it as much, so I try to send my camera with people. Mm-hmm. but it's not always possible to, meet up and give it to them. And it never gets filmed as much as when I'm not there because no one else has the patience to do it that I do. Because it's not fun like you might think, but I enjoy filming because I know that it's going to help a lot of people. And if I'm watching what I already think is the most interesting bout anyway, I may as well just record it because I'm there. But for a lot of people, I know my dad he used to film a lot when I was fencing more, and he just hated doing it, but he always did, so huge thank you to him for that. But when I'm not around, it's harder to get people to do that sort of thing. So specific events, I really always wanted to qualify for World Championships or the Olympics, obviously, but neither of those things ever happened. So I always wanted to go to those tournaments to film, especially because there is more than just men's saber there. Most of the time I film men's saber because it's what's available to me. Unless I'm at a NAC or something, I really have no exposure to the other ones because the World Cups almost never have another weapon. Sometimes they'll have women's saber, and when they do, I definitely make sure I film it, but for the most part, I just go to men's saber World Cups, so that's what I film.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering how you chose the tournaments, and it's mostly just because, well, I'm going to be there anyway, so I might as well film everything that I can.
The only times that has not happened was someone once sent me footage of a World Cup, an épée World Cup, I think in Germany, just the top 8, top 4, and final bouts, and I very happily uploaded that. If anyone wants to send me footage of World Cup finals, I'd be very happy to give you credit and put it in a platform where a lot of people will see it. But the other times that's happened are when there's a Women's Saber World Cup in New York City that I can go to very easily. But otherwise, I can't make it out to California to film the men's foil easily, and I'm definitely not flying to Europe to film, anything. Mm-hmm. So it's just what's available.
So if anybody out there, hint, hint, would like to sponsor some travel, hint, hint, then...
Ooh, that's a good one. I like that.
Is that something that you'd be willing to do? Like if...
Oh, yeah, for sure. I love fencing, and I'm friends with a lot of the people on a lot of the teams, so I definitely would be happy to go to these countries and hang out with my friends and watch and film some fencing, especially since in the Saber World Cup circuit, it's very much just the same couple World Cups every year. So I think I've been to Budapest 6 times, I've been to Moscow 4 or 5 times, I've been to Madrid 6 times, Padua 6 times. I've been to South Korea once, and whenever you get to go somewhere like that, that's outside of the normal schedule, it's super fun. So especially going to one of the other World Cups would probably bring me to a place that I've never been before. Mm-hmm. So that would be awesome.
Yeah, that would be great. How do you get permission to video at all of these places? I mean, do you just do it and people now know who you are so they don't mess with you?
Yeah, basically. A lot of the directors know who I am and what I'm doing as well, so a lot of them will just let me kind of come into the strip and film if I can't get access to, so in certain places, they set up the strips so that you can watch, for example, everything from the bleachers. And in those cases, it's kind of annoying because you can't get to the 2 far strips as easily because everything is facing one direction, so you can't just wait on the other side because you can't see the scoreboard as well, and the angle is different. So in those cases, sometimes the director will let me, stand next to them on the strip, and as long as they don't say anything, I can get these really nice, very close-up shots, and you see that more often in New York. Or not New York, sorry, in the U.S. World Cup. Sometimes it happens in Boston or whatever, but it happens a lot more often in the U.S. because even more of those directors know me, and in the U.S. it's a lot easier for me to get a pass or something. But yeah, that's how.
You talked a little bit ago about your Nicholas Lopez and your Aldo Montano compilation video. Tell me about the process of making one of those things. Like, how long does it take, and how do you even come up with the idea for one?
So that's a good question. Usually I have an aspect of the fencing that I like and want to get examples of just so that I can see them all together, and that ends up turning into a video. So it usually is something that I'll notice at a certain point. I remember with Lopez, definitely was very active. I remember thinking, I love how he sets up his counterattacks with other counterattacks and let me see them all together so that I can see how he does that. And at that point, I had already noticed a lot of them. I was kind of keeping mental track of where they are. Like in his bout with O from the Olympics, it happened not that often. In his bout with Poznikov, it happened these 4 or 5 times. In his bout with Pina, it happened these 4 times, and I know pretty much where in the video those things are. I don't have as much time to watch the footage as I used to, so I don't have that kind of catalog in my head anymore. Certainly not to the degree that I did, but it was really easy to just kind of see something like, oh, Montano lands a ton of these attacks, and then I already have the mental notes of where I can find them. So it used to be a lot quicker than it is now. And the Amazing Touch videos take a long time. When I get the footage, I always watch through it all immediately to make sure nothing questionable or whatever has been said, and to make sure the quality is up to my standards. So when I'm watching them and I see a touch that I think is really high quality or exceptional in some way, I actually write it down in a notepad on my computer. But when I don't have as much footage, like this year I have, I think, footage from only 2 or 3 tournaments, I have a much shorter list, and so I have to rely on other people like Fencing Vision and Sydney Saber, who have much more footage than I do at this point. And so that takes a little longer because I don't have the need to watch it at the time, so I don't go through that whole active process of recording when everything interesting is happening. So I kind of have to just binge it at the end of the year, and that, especially just the process of watching through, takes a long time. To try to hit as many of the top 16 and above bouts as I can without missing anything. So the process, once I have that, is pretty quick. It usually just takes a couple of hours. I put them in, I clip them while I'm watching television or something, and then I usually ask a bunch of my high-level friends from the US and from other countries what touches don't belong, because especially after you watch so much footage, for me, I just kind of like forget, like, oh, that was a nice counterattack, but someone else is like, no, that's totally standard, get rid of that.
Yeah.
So then after that pruning process and adding some special effects and like, ooh, this one looks nice next to this one, and I like this music with the flow of the video, you have the final product.
Wow.
So
That's a lot of work. That's hours and hours and hours, probably days.
yeah. I mean, a lot of it is fun because I get to talk to my friends anyway, and I do enjoy editing videos. So, yeah, and it gives you a very intimate understanding of the people that are in the videos and how that stuff works. I remember one time I fenced Salagi in a team event, and I had just had so much experience watching him that I just knew exactly what I was supposed to do, and I actually beat him very badly in that team event. It was the only time that we'd ever fenced each other, but it was nice to go in with a plan of someone I had never fenced before, just because I'd seen them so often, and just be able to do exactly what I knew I was supposed to do. So that was a lot of fun.
The whole purpose of watching video
is to learn. Exactly. Learn, win.
Now, you've talked a lot about analyzing all of these actions and, that you like this because you can see the setups and all of that. How do you approach analyzing a bout on video? Because you've got to communicate that to your audience as well.
I don't really do many video analyses. In fact, the ones that you see on the channel are done by other people almost every time. But when I am analyzing about myself, I did this at a camp over the summer for the Peter Westbrook Foundation. I actually brought in my computer and watched and analyzed a bout with them. And at first I just start by watching and kind of seeing what each person is doing, how the director is calling things. And then you see someone make an action. For example, someone will try to make a pull and it doesn't work. So I'll go back and I'll say, why didn't that work? Maybe it's because it was done at the wrong time. maybe it's because it was done at the perfect time and the person is just a little bit longer than they were expecting. But the reason that an action doesn't work is extremely important, because if I try to pull Goob on Gil short and he hits me anyway, it could have been done at a perfect time. He's just so long that you have to make the fake from a little farther away next time and be more athletic. But if you're making a fake and they're just not reacting to it, that's totally different. You have to react next time by either doing it at a different time or showing them that mistake and then hitting them in preparation. But the reason that you're losing a touch is very important. So I'll watch a pattern start to emerge, and then I'll go back and look at, why is that pattern emerging? Why did this pull work when that one didn't before? Why did this counterattack work after the pull this time, but last time it didn't? Maybe he's setting things up a little bit differently. And you just watch, I actually watch each touch several times when I'm looking at something, from left's perspective, from right's perspective, from the distance perspective. I'll look again at their feet. What exact moment is his foot on the left hitting the ground relative to the space of the person and what their feet are doing on the right? And you can kind of find these trends in people that work pretty well. So sometimes it's very specific to just one situation, but the less adaptable people, the ones who have been doing it a long time and just kind of are very set in their ways, just do the same thing over and over again against people, and that's when you can really be like, oh, he always does this little thing right before he finishes, and that's when you can start kind of picking up patterns and exploiting them. So I definitely watch the bout from a tactical perspective more than a habit perspective, but you do pick those habits up if you watch the bout and the adjustments that people make over time.
Well, and that takes a certain discipline to watch those bouts for the tactics, especially if there are some cool touches. I mean, it's pretty easy to just focus on, oh, that was a really great, sky hook or whatever. But
right, but to me, it's the distance and the setup that make that action cool, because you can't just get a cool sky hook. You can't just run out and do it. You have to set it up. Because if you try to run out and skyhook people 5 times and you only get it on the last one, then you're sacrificing a lot to look cool. But if you set it up correctly, you can get that touch every time, and that's way more fun than missing it 5 times. So to me, it's not a disciplined approach at all. If you're going to look cool, you need to have the expertise and the knowledge to do that. And again, that's not why I'm doing it specifically, but that's the mentality that you have to have, in my opinion.
you have a YouTube channel and a Facebook page, and you've got quite a presence on fencing.net and Reddit. Are you going to branch out into even more technological areas?
I doubt it at this point. I'm starting to travel to less World Cups than I used to because of a lot of injuries that have been, that have come up, or recurrences of old injuries just due to me getting a little bit older. And at this point, it's just not available to me the way it was before. So if I had been healthy enough to keep going to every single tournament the last few years, I probably would have tried to branch into something a little bit different. I don't know what that would be, but you can't just sit still with anything and just stay the same that you've always been. So when I was doing it, I was always looking for different things that I could make videos of. For example, the last season that I participated in fully, I started making those current trends and directing videos so that I could try to have an influence on the way that the directing is in the United States. Usually at the NACS, the directing lags behind World Cup fencing about 2 years, which is really frustrating because even though they're making correct calls from about 2 years ago, it really just punishes the top athletes who are going overseas and fencing a certain way, and then have to change what they're doing in the States. Because in practice, when my goal was to go to World Cups and do well there, I'm practicing at practice the way that I would fence at a World Cup. And then you go to a tournament in the US and it's just completely different, and it's very frustrating. But my goal isn't just to do well and get top 2 or whatever at the NAC, it's to do well at a World Cup. So even though it's frustrating, that's the goal. So I wanted to make those videos to try to catch the saber trends in the U.S. up to the saber trends overseas. So I always try to look for things like that where I can either help the sport or there's like an aspect that maybe I'm not or someone else is not exploring. So that's how I kind of approach that.
Did you notice that affected the way that the referees were making calls?
I did not.
Okay.
A lot of the time, even the people who know what they're supposed to be doing are told beforehand in a meeting or in a clinic how they want things to be called. And if you don't call them that way, they're not going to hire you back. So it's not a problem of the directors, it's a problem of the administration. And that needs to change. So it doesn't matter how good your directors are if you're telling them to do things in an outdated way. But again, it's hard because for most of the people in the country, it's going to be fine because most of the people in the country aren't going to these World Cups, but also doing something specifically that only hurts your top athletes is not good for the sport either.
Right.
So it's hard. You need to balance those things. And I don't think it would be too hard to make the change because the trend still happens anyway, and it happens at the same speed. It's just happening on a 2-year delay, approximately. So I think the fencers, especially the top fencers, would be a lot happier. And that's also why a lot of the time you see people from another country come to these tournaments and they don't do very well. Like I remember Shu from China came last year, and he was one of the top 20 fencers in the world at that point, and he lost in the 16 to Jeff Spear, who's a good fencer, but it was, a lot of people come to our tournaments and they have a lot of complaints about the way the directing is because it's not the way that it is overseas. College fencers especially will come here from other countries, like the Germans and the Canadians, and they'll say, like, I hate going to the NACs because it's just not what I'm used to. And it's true, it's not. It's frustrating. So I would push hard to change that.
Well, thanks for that insight. That was really an interesting perspective. Speaking of international people, you have a relationship with Sydney Sabre. You mentioned them a little bit ago. They do a lot of fencing videos too. And
Yes, they do.
is there enough room on this planet for 2 creators of fencing videos?
Well, at some point I hope there's enough room for like 10 or 20 of them, but I think there's definitely enough room for both of us. Like I said, I'm kind of doing less now than I used to. And the way that they cover things, they can get an entire tournament where I cannot get more than my 1 or 2 cameras can record. So it's definitely good that they're increasing exposure for the sport. A lot of people, like Fencing Vision, will upload blocks of fencing in, like for an entire tournament, they'll upload the 64 through the 8 in one 8-hour chunk and 4 streams on that one video. So if you want to find something, it's really difficult. But the way that you label the footage and make it accessible to people is really important too. And that's what Sydney Sabre does. They take an entire tournament, cut it up and label it so that people can find bouts easily and then go watch it. You mentioned before that there are now almost fencing celebrities, and Daryl Homer is definitely one of those celebrities in the US. And people will ask me a lot of the time, oh, did you see Daryl's bout with this guy? Where can I find it? And I have to tell them, all right, you go to this Fencing Vision thing and you go to hour 7 minute 33 on the blue strip, and then you watch for 20 minutes, and that's the bout. That's ridiculous. I should just be able to send a link, and they should just be able to watch the video. They shouldn't even have to ask me. They should just be able to search for the video that they want and find it. And the fact that they don't is another problem with our sport. It doesn't have the exposure that other people have.
Right.
Unless you're like me and you know where to find everything, you're not going to be able to find it a lot of the time, and that's not good. So,
Well,
so definitely, I'm very happy with what they're doing. I like the upbeat compilations that they do, and those things just increase hype for the sport and make people excited about it. So that's all great, and I'm really happy with what they're doing.
it sounds like you need some minions of chaos.
Yeah, the cycles of chaos, as it were, definitely.
some people that can go out there that are competing, and once they're not participating anymore in the tournament, then just record some bouts for you.
Yeah, like I said, I sometimes send my camera with people to World Cup so that they can do that, but a lot of the time people either just want to watch, or when they're done competing, they just want to leave. So those two things are not particularly conducive to recording, and I don't have the money or desire to pay someone to do that at this point.
Yeah, you need someone who's passionate about it like you are.
Yeah, exactly. But there aren't a lot of people who are passionate in that specific way. So,
Is there a competitor or an action that you'd love to make a compilation video for, but you haven't yet?
I really like Rousset's counterattack, and I probably would have done a video on that if the timing hadn't changed, because he had such a devastating second intention counterattack in the center that just got everyone. And if you watch my videos of him, I actually call it out a lot as the Rousset special. I really like that action a lot, and I think he knows that I like that, and pretty much anyone who watches videos where I'm recording of him know that I like that action a lot. I really like Ibrahimov's attack. That's probably something I will make a video of at some point. The distance is excellent. He has a great way of staying just outside of distance until he feels that you're not ready, and then just accelerates, and he rarely gets counterattacked and rarely misses. It's a really impressive attack. I also really used to like Reshetnikov's parry repost in the center. He had such a great way of, I guess, just going from a very slow speed to applying so much pressure that the person, it worked on everyone. The person just fell into him, and he always caught it and made a great parry. Partly because he was doing it for the last second, part of the way was how it was set up. But I don't know whether he's just lost confidence or what in the last few years, but he has not been doing that very well. So I don't have the footage to make that anymore. But if he starts doing well at some point, I will probably try to do that. I also think that Goo's attack is amazing. Maybe at some point I will make a video of how he pushes people out of the center. I definitely have ideas, I just don't have as much access to footage anymore, because I used to use almost entirely my own footage, and I don't have as much of that, as I mentioned a few times already, anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe at some point in the future, but no plans to do those things going forward. So,
Do you hope to turn this into a career someday? Or is it going to always be forever just a really cool hobby that you do because you're passionate about it?
probably the latter. I don't think that there's enough money in it at this point, and it's hard to take a product that you've been providing for free for a long time and suddenly monetize it. And I understand that people want the footage that I'm recording just, for free, because that's what I've always done. And at this point, I don't think that that's going to be helpful for the sport either, because if you put someone behind a paywall, obviously by definition, less people are going to see it. And as I said before, any exposure is good exposure. So I just want the footage and the analyses available so that people can see the sport and see that it's not just two people running at each other or two people staring at each other like they have the conceptions of Saber and Epee being. But at this point, I don't think that it will be something more than just a hobby.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that brings me to the end of the first part of our interview together. Let's finish up with a mixture of famous questions from James Lipton and Marcel Proust. Are you ready?
Go for it.
All right. What is your favorite word?
I really like eloquently and plethora.
Ooh.
Something about the way they both roll off the tongue, and I don't know, I just like the way they sound.
Plethora, that's a good one.
This is a good one. It's one of my favorite words.
What is your least favorite word?
It's not the word specifically, but I don't like the context that people use the word fine or sure a lot of the time, where it's like, do you want to do you want to go out on the boat with me later? Fine. It's like, well, that's not very enthusiastic and doesn't make me want to ask you again in the future. That sort of thing. So it's not the word. It's kind of like the feeling behind it.
Okay.
But that's always been like a pet peeve of mine, and it's definitely the people who know me well know that.
What sound or noise do you love?
What sound or noise do I love? I really like nature sounds, and my favorite sound to fall asleep to is waves. So we used to go to South Carolina every year and for a week during the summer for vacation as a family, and it's always really nice to have the windows open and you can hear the waves breaking on the sand or the rocks, and I just love falling asleep to that noise. Sometimes I put it on my iPod and put it on my pillow and just listen to the sound of, waves crashing to fall asleep. It's not as good as the real thing, but it does in a pinch for sure. So I think that's probably one of my favorite sounds.
What sound or noise do you hate?
I really don't like nails on a chalkboard, obviously. I don't know that there's any sound that I really particularly don't like. I don't think that there is any.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
At this point, I'm working on doing software development. I think I would like to go into game development. It's not an entirely different field. So if you're asking me to choose a completely different field, I think I might like to be a teacher. A lot of what I've been doing on my channel is instruction, and when I do clinics and things, people seem to like them. So it's definitely something I enjoy and that I seem to have an aptitude for, so possibly that at some point, but or like maybe in another life, not at some point.
What profession would you not like to do?
That's a hard one. I don't know if there's any specific profession I wouldn't want to do. I don't know if I'd ever want to be in politics. A lot of it seems like compromising your values to get things done that are not as pure as the ideas that you had for them in the first place. So just a lot of compromise and a lot of slow stall. I don't know, just doesn't something I'd ever want to come near.
Where would you like to live?
If I wasn't fencing anymore, I would definitely move to somewhere that's warm. I already mentioned my love for nature and wave sounds, and I think the beach is my favorite place to be. So if I had an unlimited amount of money and didn't have the ability to fence anymore, I'd probably go somewhere warm and sunny the year round, like Hawaii or Florida. Been to Hawaii a few times, and I just loved every minute that I spent there. It's always very nice. There's always waves to listen to while you fall asleep, and it's a great atmosphere. I think people are also just happier when it's sunny and temperate outside. So,
What do you value most in your friends?
there are a few things. I really like, obviously, having your friends be loyal to you is a good thing. The one trait that I can't stand in people is when they're not good at communicating with you, because if you can't have a conversation, especially when they're not in person, so if you can't connect with someone, if I can't send you a message, if I send you a message and you never respond to it, I can't be friends with you, because how are we supposed to stay in touch if there's no back and forth at all? So that's the one thing I would say I don't like in friends. It's the hardest thing for me to stay in touch with, because it's the hardest thing for me to overcome, because if it doesn't matter how much I like you, if you're not able to respond on my timetable, then it's just not going to work. So,
Who is your hero?
my hero, I don't think I have a hero at this point. I don't know.
Okay. And what is your motto?
I also don't have a motto. I would say I'm very upbeat and at sometimes impulsive, but I like to try new things, and I don't like to stagnate in certain areas. So I always want to, I'm always looking for ways that I can improve things. I'm always trying to move myself forward. So I don't really have a motto, but that's kind of my mentality about everything.
Okay. Thank you very much for giving me so freely of your time and,
Yeah, no problem.
and all of the insights that you had into your creation.
Of course, I hope that if people hear any of the things, especially about the way to analyze videos, I hope that it helps them. So that's all I've ever wanted to do in the community with the videos, is help people get into it and improve and expose our sport more.
A big thanks, as always, to my friend Tony Escueda, who does all of the editing for this podcast and who's created all of the great music for it. Thank you as well to my husband, David Sierra, who created the logo for this podcast and who has been very supportive in my endeavors. Thank you as well to my sponsor, Cutting Edge Fencing Center, who gave me the funds to be able to offer you my Saber Coach Kate podcast swag of stickers, patches, and pins. You can pick one up this weekend at the North Texas Roundup if you happen to be coming to our event over Labor Day. Also, thank you to all my listeners out there who have been so supportive of my efforts to promote the sport of fencing and to record some of the history of it by interviewing some really incredible people. If you'd like to check out my blog, that is sabercoachkate.wordpress.com. Any suggestions for interviews or comments in general can be posted there, or you can email me at sabercoachkate@gmail.com.